Hello and welcome to another edition of Another Book Review. This week I'll be reviewing Michael J. Sandel's Justice. I'll talk very briefly about the author, go into an overview about what the book is about, talk about what I liked about the book, what I didn't like about the book, who I'd recommend the book to, and finish off with what I'll be reading for next time. Sandel is a Harvard professor. He is famous for writing this book. He wrote another book more recently called Tyranny of the Meritocracy, which I haven't had a chance to read. I hope to after reading this one. He's best known for this book. He has a lecture series on this book, Justice, from his course that he's taught at Harvard for many years. And what the book is his look at different moral philosophies and how we can use different concepts of justice in order to navigate the modern world and thinking of the best way to act. The subtitle of the book is What's the Right Thing to Do? So Sandel looks at the history of moral philosophy and applies these different ideas and different real-world examples of where there was a moral qualm or moral question, trying to find the best way to navigate not only individual events but also broader questions, be it gay marriage, what is the ethical thing to do in terms of surrogate parents, what are the limits of loyalty, what is the true nature of being a cheerleader. And so if you require a golf cart to play professional golf, should that be allowed or should you be banned from doing it? So there's a lot to the book, and I thought it was incredibly breezy and a nice read in terms of laying out what for a lot of people is very complicated, difficult terrain. I think Sandel's gift is he's able to bring that really to the common person and write in such a way that you really understand what he's talking about and how to apply what he's talking about to these examples in a way that I thought was really, really the biggest compliment I can give the book is that you can give it to, as a primer for these ideas, you can give it to someone who is even a high schooler and have them really begin to enter into the fray. I also really appreciated there's a large section of the book about libertarianism, which he kind of ties to what is commonly referred to as repugnant markets. So this would be the buying and selling of organs, vice like gambling, prostitution. One really extreme example where a man agrees to be killed and eaten. And so I thought that he does, I think, a fair job of giving the due. There's not really a lot of straw man arguments in the book. There are definitely parts where I disagreed with him. And as the book went along, I found myself disagreeing more and more. But I certainly appreciated the ability for him to write in a manner that really took ideas that were very stodgy and difficult to understand and really bring them to modern readers and being able to apply these ideas to really very clear, understandable moral qualms and issues that people have with different things. So that's basically a large part of the book. Towards the end of the book, he gives his preferred version of justice. So after going through utilitarianism, Immanuel Kant's version of ethics, the Rawlsian veil of ignorance, libertarianism, as I mentioned. He finishes the book by looking at Aristotle and at telos, I believe it's pronounced, the understanding of the essence of something or what makes something is, what is the purpose of this thing, and then using that to try to understand what is the ethical dilemmas around this thing, the true essence of it. Towards the end of the book, he tries to give his version of ethics. He has a large part of the book, and probably the book that I had the biggest problem with, when he talks about the couple of examples where I felt that he could have done a stronger job. I've never read Immanuel Kant, and basically reading through Sandel's reading of Kant, I think he tried his level best to make it understandable, but I had a real struggle with that. There's a couple times in the Aristotle chapter as well where I struggled to understand if maybe it was a concept I wasn't understanding because the society that Aristotle was writing in was so different than ours. He kept using the word virtue, and I'm not sure if I totally understood what he meant by virtue. And then Kant, I just had a hard time understanding the idea of what makes something moral. The way that Sandel writes it, something is only moral if the intention for doing the thing is moral, not the result of the thing. And so I struggled with that quite a bit. And then he gives Sandel's version of obligation. He has a whole section of, can you have an obligation without a consent to an obligation? his examples for that, where you can possibly have a obligation to someone or something without giving your consent, I thought were pretty weak. I think he uses David Hume as an example of that. I wish he had found a better example, because I thought that one didn't really live up to the rest of the book. He doesn't also go into, well, if someone has an obligation without consenting to it, who determines what that obligation is? If someone is consenting to an obligation, that line of reasoning is much clearer. What do you do if you disagree with the obligation that someone lends on you, puts to you, and how do you go about disagreeing with that in a moral way? He doesn't really go into that. And I mean, this is a primer of a book. It's only about 270 pages, but because of that, I had a hard time with that. And then the end of the book, it's really a little bit tacked on with, he basically says, well, how do we take these ideas and apply them to the current world to make the debate that we have in our current system more, for lack of a better term, less inane or less shallow? How do we use these philosophers? How do we use their ideas to make our debate in the public system stronger and richer and fuller for everyone? And a lot of it was, it felt tacked on, and it wasn't clear to me if Sandel, to me, was searching for a system or looking for a system that I don't think has ever existed in my lifetime. And so I was a little surprised about his solution, which kind of, there's almost like a root cause analysis where he kind of calls for a restoration of common spaces. And I don't know if that would actually give Sandel what he's looking for. But I guess it's a nice idea. So there is that. He also, there's one or two places where I think there's a part of Barack Obama and Barack Obama calling for an expansion of service. And in his discussion of that, he calls out George W. Bush for not calling for expansion of service after 9/11. George W. Bush did actually call for an expansion of service in his State of the Union address in 2002. So I don't know why Sandel didn't just check that. Maybe directly right after 9/11, that wasn't the case. But George W. Bush in his State of the Union address in 2002 or 2003 did call and actually get something of an expansion of national service. Maybe not to the degree that Obama wanted, but I was surprised that Sandel didn't check that, which is a small thing, but it was a little frustrating in the book, because the rest of the book is pretty good. I think the first 3/4 of the book are quite good, and then you get into the Kant and the Aristotle, and I think that for a modern reader, for me as someone who considers myself a modern reader, I felt that very, very difficult to go. Up to Rawls, I'm okay, but after Rawls, I found it difficult to read. And he doesn't, I think he stops roughly around 1990. So if there are philosophers who have written after this who are intellectually important to the idea of philosophy, they're not included in this book. So there is a little bit of a cutoff there, and I don't know if that's the case for everybody. But as a primer, if you're just someone who's ever wanted to learn more about ethical thinking and different moral philosophies that people may have and try to determine what is morally just or right, I think this is an excellent primer for that. The Kant part of it aside and the Aristotle part of it aside, the rest of it I thought were really, really great examples of seeing how different people apply different ways of thinking and how you can come to a different decision depending on what mode of thinking you're using. Sometimes I think he does get into the trouble of conflating legal thinking and moral thinking. He scolds Scalia for coming down against Martin, who is the golfer who wanted to use the golf cart. I think reading Sandel's disagreement with Scalia, I tended to agree with Scalia, because I think that the reasons that Scalia was giving were perfectly in line with a legal reckoning of the different responsibilities of the court versus the bylaws of the PGA. So it made sense to me. It didn't really make sense to Sandel, and his disagreement with Scalia I thought were kind of silly. But overall, it was a really interesting book, and I think you could give it to a general audience. It's a little dated. It's from 2009, and so some of these things are not the moral issues that they once were. But if you were looking for just a primer for different ways of ethical thinking and philosophizing, I think you could do a lot worse. Next time, I'm not sure exactly what I'll be reading. Probably will be reading Sleepwalk, but I will have that up in probably a couple weeks here. I'm probably going to take a break for a week to do some other stuff, but I will be back soon. If you haven't gotten a chance to already, please subscribe to the channel. If you've enjoyed this, please hit the like button. Yeah, I definitely would recommend if you've never read an introduction to philosophy before, and if you're someone who is looking for something that's very readable and understandable, this is a really, really great introduction. I would also highly recommend Sandel's YouTube videos. Sandel has a kind of a peculiar way of speaking. So I did enjoy reading the book. There's also an audiobook that he does as well on it, but it's a very, very quick read, very, very breezy, very, very easy to understand. I think you can get through it in a couple days. If you read, if you're someone who is a pretty frequent reader, you'll get through it pretty quickly. And I think the ideas in it are really important. And I think they do a good job of doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is to try to open your mind to different ways of looking at the world and how different people see things differently and how they disagree. Michael J. Sandel, Justice. Until next time, bye.